Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. Welcome to the DEX Show. Now, we're going to get to our guest momentarily, but I want to welcome Tim, as ever, to the show. And congratulations, Tim. Big week for your son, right? He graduated. Tell me if I got this right, from MIT. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the congrats is all his. You know, I always say parents can do a hell of a job messing up a kid. All you got to do is stand back and let him go. So credit's all his. But yeah, he just finished up 7 years at MIT, got his doctorate, and it was an awesome ceremony on Wednesday. And congrats to Cameron. He's off and running.
Listen, I like you giving him all the credit, but I think I think that's winning at parenting, Tim. I'm super impressed. Personally, until my kids are grown up, I'm holding fire on the nature nurture debate. But let me assure you, I'm going to go hard one way or the other, depending on how it turns out. But no, that's absolutely fantastic, and I'm really, really delighted and excited to welcome our guest to the show. He's Bill Schaninger. Bill, I'm butchering your name.
You practiced it as well. This is the problem. You practiced it beforehand. Now you got it.
Bill Schaninger. I got it there, didn't I? Come on, right. An international speaker, author, researcher, Forbes contributor, and an advisor to senior executives. Bill, I have to say, you and our co-producer, Ella, myself and our co-producer, Ella, I think we both fell down like a YouTube wormhole enjoying your talks and stuff. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. There's no shortage of video of my very large cranium.
Well, here's a little more for the world, Bill, and audio too. But we were just discussing before we started recording. You were just showing us your desk setup, Bill, and I think, like Tim, you're a bit of a Lego buff. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so. I'm just finishing. Let's see if I can grab it here. I'm just finishing now the full-size Bond DB. And so I keep this nearby my setup, because as a kid in school, I would be a doodler, and that was what helped me focus. And then as an adult, I just kept Lego around and started just building. And it's a thing I do for me to help keep me focused. And it's, I mean, when I'm speaking, okay, it's one thing, right? I actually have to speak, but there are times when, large groups, I need it just to be locked in on what's going on.
Yeah, there's a problem though, Bill. The drawings fit nicely in a book, but where do you put all the Legos? We have bins and bins and bins of Lego pieces. What do you do with them all?
So it's a great question. So my house in PA, and there in my office, I have two big bookshelves that are basically degrees and Lego. And one side is Star Wars and the other side is cars. Here in the flat in Brooklyn, I have just cars, including the Senna F1 car, which is wonderful. I'll take those back to PA and put them up there.
Cool.
And you like a bit of Lego as well, don't you, Tim?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've done it. My son was more the aficionado. We've got all kinds of little exhibits and half built, and some that fell on the floor and broke, and they're all over the place.
But listen, Bill. So as I say, we really, really enjoy your stuff here. But for the audience who don't already know you and aren't familiar with your work, give yourself a little introduction, if you would, mate.
Sure. Well, I'm Bill Schaninger. I'm from Eastern Pennsylvania, a place called the Lehigh Valley, so Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton. And, I'm straight Gen X, right? So I'm 54. I'll be 55 at the end of the summer. And my mom and dad were teen parents. Nobody in my family had gone to college, and so I had. And then I might have run a little bit long on undergraduate in terms of running out of athletic eligibility before I was done going to school. And so I wrestled and played football, through college. And I was forced with this situation where my pop had died when I was between my sophomore and junior year. And so I was 20, just about to be 21. And I needed to work. And so I started working at this place called Kids Peace National Centers for Kids in Crisis. So I was working there part-time. And think of it as kids all the way up to 18 or 20, depending on the jurisdiction they're from, who are sent there probably because they're duly diagnosed, usually some MR or MH kind of problem. But rather than putting them in juvie, they gave them another crack to try to help them. And so when I graduated from Moravian, which is then Moravian College, now Moravian University, they had said to me, don't go on the market. We're going to give you a unit. And so it was a 20, 22, 25 bed unit at the biggest. For a 23-year-old, that was remarkable, right? In fact, in hindsight, almost kind of crazy. I worked for a guy, Rick Krauthamel, who was just spectacular, but a really, really early formative leader for me. But, they'd walk me out on the hill and go, see that house up there? It's yours. All the kids in there are yours. All the workers in there are yours. Everything that happens there, even when you're not here, yours. Do you get it? That's what it means. And, I was just so hell-bent on the idea of delivering on what my commitment was that I didn't take stock at all, that I didn't know what I was doing. And so as soon as I got there, we were doing it, but then I figured out I have no idea how to run this place. So I went back to school at night full-time to get an MBA. And that's when I really started making this connection between, hey, you can explain why people behave the way they do. That's not just psychology for the purposes of a clinical setting. Actually, it's a really big deal at work because, a strategic plan is just a plan until someone does something different. Marketing plan, operating plan, whatever you have, it only matters when the person picks it up and wants to do something different. And so that I got really turned on by that, this idea that I could continue trying to explain why people behave the way they do, what motivates them, and what their values are, what their worldviews are, and how that impacts their daily behavior. But I could do it in the context of business. And so I stopped working altogether in 96, enrolled at Auburn in their PhD program. And then there was a real split then between IO programs and management programs. We were all being trained the same way in quant, and I'd already had a clinical setting experience. But if I went to the business school, I was going to make like a third more as a faculty, which is why I did it, at that time. And I did 2 tracks, org analysis and change and HR, because I wanted to put numbers to the soft stuff, in air quotes. I did that. I loved it. I had a great time, got to write a lot, with amazing faculty. There's a book on selection called Gatewood and Field. I studied under Junior Field. My chair's chair was Noel Tishy, and Steve Kerr, things like that. Just amazing group of faculty I was studying under. And then I thought I was going to go and, 99, I was, the Academy of Management was in Boston. I thought I was just going to go get it. I had an offer from St. Joe's actually to come back, but they were discounting me because I was ABD. And I thought, well, I'll show you. And I ended up joining McKinsey in London. And I thought this will be 2 years on McKinsey's dime in London. And then I'll hightail it back to academics, think big thoughts and not work very hard, but watch exceptional football. Ooh. So that didn't work. I just retired from McKinsey last May. So like literally a year. Almost to the day.
Wow.
And, that run at McKinsey, though, was pretty darn formative, right? They have a tool called the Organizational Health Index. I wrote that with a colleague, Matt Guthridge, all the way back in 2002. We worked on large scale change, doing the influence model, what became the 5 frames, and then all the beyond performance thinking around organizational health. The second book, Beyond Performance 2.0, was Scott Keller and I. Started people analytics for McKinsey, ran global talent, eventually was the global knowledge leader for McKinsey, and looked after all of our stuff in the last 7 to 10 years around future of work and or great attrition, great attraction was either me and a small team or my good friend and colleague Aaron DeSmet and I, leading. And that then we ended up with a book last year called Power to the Middle, which is around the importance of middle managers to organizations. That was Brian Hancock and Emily Field and I. Brian and I did the podcast McKinsey Talks Talent for a couple of years with Lucia Romney. So, that's how I got to the point where I retired. I was just going to do the speaking circuit and tour the book and frankly not work very hard, right? It had been a long run. I was tired.
Pay your dues.
I made it 4 months, and then I got introduced to these folks at Modern Executive Solutions. And that was really eye-opening because, it's like, who'd ever heard of Modern? It was a search firm that had some advisory, assessment, and coaching. But then I discovered, there was a woman named Christy Smith who was trained formally at Deloitte. She was there for, 17, 18 years under Barbara Adachi. Then she went to Apple, set up their DE&I and their talent shop, and then went to Accenture and ran their org practice globally and ran the West Coast. She was thinking about joining as well. We agreed we'd join together. There's another colleague named Scott McFarlane who ran a big chunk of Korn Ferry for a long time, leading the search. Larry Eman from Gallup, who I had done the org science initiative with 10 years earlier. We even served a couple clients together. He had joined, and then most recently we have Dean Carter, from Patagonia and Guild has joined us. So in a relatively short period of time, you've gotten this group of people that said, we all felt like we had a little something undone. Mm-hmm. And the gist of it really was, why would companies want to separate out the conversation around how a place is going to be run and who runs the place? And most consultancies will not get involved in assessment and selection or search because of the risk. I ran that up at McKinsey many times and just appropriately, it was a different risk profile than a consultancy was willing to take on. But on the flip side, the search firms trying to do advisory, it just doesn't work, right? It's sold as, would you like fries with that?
Right.
And the comp structure in particular for search partners is such that it's very much zero sum, very much Hunger Games, and very difficult to sell across the firm. So we were just determined we could do it differently, and we think do it better by bringing really good IO psychology to really good assessment under the guise of how you're going to make money first and foremost, right? So start with a management consulting principle of we're here to understand how you make money and how you run the place. Then we're going to nail who runs the place. Mm-hmm. And that's, I'll tell you, that's worked okay. I've been surprised. I wasn't sure what it was going to be like leaving a brand like McKinsey. I mean, it is the number one consulting firm in the world. Mm-hmm. Right? You know, recent publicity notwithstanding, it's still the number one consulting firm in the world. And I wasn't sure how it was going to work out. And it's been great. And, you know, it's real excitement from clients who are excited to combine those two things.
Very cool. I have to say a couple of things I really, really particularly enjoy about your work, and we'll get to the other one a little later in the discussion, I think. But the first one is that as vigorously as you sort of consider the modern workplace and modern work, you really ground your analysis in your historical and scientific interests. And it really comes off, makes it very compelling. And I'd really like to start then with a big question, right? I mean, this is a show that predominantly focuses on digital employee experience, but we like to expand our remit to think about employee experience more generally, because digital is a part of that, and we'll get onto digital specifically shortly too, I think. But love to hear what your reflections are on the history and significance of employee experience at large as a term in its origin and in its broader meaning for work in general.
Well, look, it's a great question. And believe it or not, I do prep for these things. So I'm like, I had some time to think about it. Okay, so I have a, Christy and I are working on a book right now, and the working title, and you can beat me here in a second, but the working title is Stupid Shit We've Told You Along the Way.
That's okay. We keep that in, Bill, don't we?
Okay. And so but the premise of that was the front end of Power to the Middle was my attempt at doing a historical look at from 1990, around when I started paying attention to it, through to COVID. And broadly, you had 3 decades, 90 to the dot-com crash to the financial crisis to COVID. And each of those tranches had things that were thematic, but when you go back and look at it, didn't make a lot of sense. Like, for instance, re-engineering. The idea of taking a process view about the major processes of companies and looking at it and getting less hands involved and leaning it out makes sense. Taken to the extreme of re-engineering the whole company and re-engineering management, of course, we don't need all those people in the middle. Kind of stupid. Made no sense. Right. And so, that was one where it was grounded in something that was an okay idea. Plus, the process-based organization had been around for 20 years prior to that. It wasn't like it was new. It was just taking, a view at it, saying this is a good idea, taken to the extreme, bad idea. Similar decade, during the TQM moment, we had quality. Remember, quality is job one, Ford's thing. Mm-hmm. That was really good for employees who love thinking, hey, we're building good vehicles. We're building good equipment. But 2 things came at the same time, Lean and 6. Lean, right? Really good for batch work. Where do our tools go? How do we eradicate waste? Find these things, really lean it out. Unfortunately for employees, that lean it out went first to working capital, notably parts, inventories, and supplies, and then was turned to human capital, where we started running down complement because, boy, we didn't need 110% of the employees. God forbid someone gets sick, takes vacation, gets married, or wants to do a rotation. And so in all cases, initial idea, good. In application, not great. I'm belaboring this just because there's a thread here. Lean, then Six Sigma. Six Sigma, really good for continuous processes. Look at the data, find your 10 best days, your 10 worst days, right? Constantly looking to narrow in and get yourself within a better band of performance, move the mean. Then somewhere along the line, someone from a management consultancy decided to combine them and call it Lean 6. On the surface, oxymoronic, makes no sense. And so that's just the first decade. Right. Then you had the run towards the end of the decade around the fixation on A-talent propagated by McKinsey and others. Right. Post GE, post Pepsi, A-talent commercial general managers are all that mattered. Well, what about the 50-some% of the people who are good, solid performers sitting right there in the middle, wanting to deliver the business for you every day? Oh, they don't matter. Again, absurd. Right. The heightened bit right after .com and the run up in startups and the run up in options to change in accounting for options, then going to grants. And what that meant, the fall of the American expatriate because of how expensive it got to be, right? So all these like academy companies said, well, hold on, We don't want to move people around every 2 years. Let's keep them in role longer. Okay, well, what did that mean? That mean you had 2 generations of leaders who didn't have P&L experience, right? Then you hit the financial crisis because lower for longer meant that most employees, as people, were treating their houses as an ATM. We fully switched to the consumption economy, and we had people thinking that everything had to come cheap. What did that coincide with? The globalization of the global economy, right? Where we were constantly playing arbitrage on labor. What did that mean? Downward suppression on labor prices, downward suppression on salaries, constantly chasing cheap. What's the problem when you chase cheap? That place, after about 10 years, starts making money, and they'd actually like to start living like the middle class, which means you pull up stakes, leave a gaping hole in that country's employment, and go to the next place. Right? So we've created these things where like it was always going to collapse unto itself. And then we had the last 10 years or so in the run up to COVID, where we came up with first it was automation, then it was analytics, then it became robotic processing, then it became AI, right? It's the next technological dystopia where you're going to have financial or technological capital replace human capital. So we created the perfect storm of fear and pushing you towards the economic exchange, where it's just about the T's and C's, just about the terms and conditions. And so all the things I studied, as a grad student around, social exchange and why would anyone go above and beyond, out the window, because we were trying to sell people on you should be like an Uber driver or a Lyft driver, have your own agency. That's garbage. No one wants to work 3 jobs. No one wants to wonder what's going to happen if one of their family members gets sick. No one wants to sit there and flit about by themselves and not be attached to anything.
100%.
Right? It's nonsense. So the reason COVID mattered so much in that period was it took a bazooka to the power dynamic that had been asymmetrically positioned to the company and put the worker on the back foot. Now, while it was enabled by digital tools, while it was enabled by tech, it did also say, we've got a problem, Houston. And its employees aren't just going to accept that the rules are dictated by the other side. It actually needs to look more like an exchange, right? So if you run that course and you think about what does it mean now for employee engagement? One, it's got to line up with their purpose or it's not going to work. Stop. Right? I wrote something with Nana Dingra a few years ago called Help Your Employees Find Their Purpose or Watch Them Leave. And the whole thing was, we arrogantly have talked about organizational purpose as if that was prime. It's the exact opposite. Individual purpose is prime. Then the amount you're willing to give the vocation is second. And then inside that is the bit that the company is actually fulfilling. We had it completely reversed out of arrogance. So that just means, look, all you can do is hope to fill up what the person is willing to give vocation. And maybe if you do an amazing job with it, it'll expand a little bit. But what COVID showed everyone was if you got to go home, and particularly women and people of color, you got to go home. You got to be the teacher because the schools are closed. You got to be the daycare person because the daycare is closed. You probably have a sick mom, sick dad, or sick aunt or uncle who are exposed. You got to look after them. By the way, you're probably in a long-term relationship, either married or otherwise. You got to look after them. And you're expected to be an employee. That moment of reckoning for many people led to a bunch of people leave the workforce altogether or start their own side hustle. But those that continue to do it said, well, hold on a minute. Let's challenge a few things. One, I don't want to do garbage that doesn't line up anymore. I don't want to be embarrassed by the company that I work for. So purpose, pride. I want to be okay wearing the badge. Third, flexibility. Flexibility now in the fullest sense. What I work on, how I work on it, with whom I work on it, where I work on it, and when I work on it. When is a big deal. The nonlinear workday was propagated by COVID because you had I remember in early days of COVID saying, hey, for the first time since I got divorced in 2013, I have my daughter half time. I'm prepping dinner. If you want to do a call, great. We're going to flip up FaceTime, but I'm prepping. And you got to know that. Now, that's just me in my own little really privileged, really affluent knowledge worker world. There's lots of people who are doing other stuff, but I think that really came about. So when we talk about engagement now, I think a huge portion of it is, what do they experience of you just as a company before you're even an employer? Does what you do line up with their purpose? And it has to line up with their purpose, not your purpose, right? Do they really feel like there's pride in association and belonging? Do they have flexibility? Okay, so now you're moving in closer to the person, right? This is a distal to proximal kind of thing. Then you say, well, what's the boss I work for? The tolerance of the a-hole, right? I mean, old school Bob Sutton, no asshole rule.
Yep.
Now more than ever, man, right? You do not need to work for a jerk, because we are still massively, massively long opportunities. At the height of the discontinuity in COVID, we were out by about 9 million people, meaning there was 9 million more jobs than there were people. To put that in context, we lost just under 9 million jobs in the financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to lose every job again to get to parity. That's the issue we have, right? And that's going over 3 years of record small business starts and the Small Business Association. So it's a long way of getting around. EX now means something more than it used. EX started back in the day as satisfaction, really. Right. And then the nuanced version of satisfaction was satisfaction with self, with others, with pay, with the job, right? Whatever. Then it went a little bit into like, the boss, right? And the team. And we tried to do a better job with the inclusive environment. That got caught up in the maelstrom of DE&I stuff, which we can talk about a bit later. I mean, now I think it is singularly, if it doesn't work for me, it doesn't work, period. Right? And so then when you get to the boss, the last thing you get to is the people you work with every day, your team. Are they supportive? Right? Can you actually be, and again, interesting language. We were talking about, well, we want you to bring your whole self to work. What if the person doesn't want to share that with you?
Right.
It's not an obligation. Show me, hey, at night, I get a little bit crazy, right?
But we're a family. Right.
Oh, God. Yeah, that nonsense. Yeah, you know what? You're not firing your family members, buddy.
Right.
So, and then the last part is just the nature of the work itself. And that is, does the person feel like they're challenged, like they have to, like they're learning? For many people, yes. Does anyone want to make more money? Sure. But the composition of the work has to be enough of the good stuff that the administrivia and the bureaucracy kept to a minimum so they can do more of the good stuff, right? You always think about it, it's puts and takes, right? So that's what exchange relationships are. You put some credits in because you're going to draw some down. EX now, my belief is it's all of those things. It's the total experience starting from the moment they're thinking about you as a company, then as an employer, through recruiting, through selection, onboarding, the actual experience, and even to how you leave. Leaving well should always allow for the possibility of a rebound. Many companies do not handle leaving well, and you just end up further hurting the brand. I don't know. That was a long answer, but I was trying to give it maybe a more fulsome view of EX.
No, it's absolutely great, Tom. I feel like Bill just answered every single question we had teed up. We'll try a few more, but that was incredibly expansive. You can tell why you're a doctor of philosophy. It's awesome. And what I really like is the kind of the nuances of, looking back between events in time versus looking at decades. What happened in the 90s? What happened in the teens? But chopping it up in between major events that are more impactful to us, I think is insightful. And we can't help but continue to look behind us, over our shoulder, especially with the new bird flu coming around. I'm interested how you feel the last 3 years really exacerbated that change in the power dynamic, the workplace relationship between employee and employer. Did COVID accelerate? Did it accelerate that remote work and tip things into the employee's favor? Where are we now, do you think?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a little complicated because it's multifaceted. For sure, the rise, let me tease out one, the rise of tech. Tech has always been super interesting in the tech employees because in many parts, they've been told they're special their entire lives, right? They usually have a computer science or some STEM background, which means they're clever. Which means they were probably in a homogeneously grouped school or class, right? Which, okay, always around the other smart kids. You're smarter than the others. That's one. They've been told they're special always. Two, by and large, for the really good coders in particular, and some of the hardware people who are designing hardware, there's an element of creative in there, which is they like doing it the way they like to do it, right? Which also means they resent control and they resent leadership. So you'll see in a lot of the tech companies, most saying, we don't need middle managers. You show me somebody like that, and I'll show you someone who's playing with somebody else's capital. Right? It's easy to be, just let us go. Well, okay, what happens when you scale? You have 1,000 flowers bloom. There was a company 40 years ago called PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. They did that. They came up with some really cool stuff. Not a single thing of it they could monetize. They ended up giving things away, like the GUI. Right? It's like clever people do still need leadership. They just need leadership in a way that allows enough room for their own brilliance and their own agency to come through, but it's not in the absence of leadership, right? So one, when you put all these people home, why am I belaboring tech first? Because tech's been treated as a unicorn for the better part of 2 decades, and in particular, unbridled hiring. So what should have been pool roles where there was no negotiation, they allowed every person, no matter how mediocre, to negotiate, catch as catch can, get what you can. When they sent them home to work, now it became, well, I'm going to bring my dog to work. I'm going to walk around in my flip-flops. I'm going to do, whatever. It made the environment at work seem like, trite, right? Because now they could do it at home. So even less constraints, the tie that bind really started coming to be, you give me a platform, you give me engines to work on, I'm going to do my job, but I'm going to do it when I want to do it. That was tech. For the bulk of the U.S. workforce, and this is important, it's the other end of the extreme, tech over here on the knowledge work, the bulk of the U.S. workforce, which is either direct service delivery or hands-on work, logistics, construction, things like that, they didn't get a break. The vast majority of employees in the world did not go remote.
Right.
They had to keep going to work. But what we did manage to do was piss all of them off by constantly talking about the small portion of the work that was working remote. Like another example of we're grunts, we're nose to the grindstone, and we don't really matter, right? So you have this, and then you have this group in the middle. That group in the middle in some form of leadership. And for those folks, let's say people my age, right? So just Mark at 54, what was the first important leadership movie or entertainment experience I saw? Wall Street. Gordon Gekko. Mm-hmm. Gordon Gekko was supposed to be the bad guy. He was not. In that movie, he was the hero. Right? Greed is good.
Greed is good.
Right? And for all the reasons, greed is good. Right? And that kind of stuff, might makes right at the height of trickle-down economics. Right? Born a generation of people, like you had Alex P. Keaton on TV and you had Gordon Gekko here, right? Now, they're both caricatures. But this idea of a rather staunchly Republican, conservative trickle-down view where the liberation of capital and autonomy was what you pursued. So that meant for these folks, it's if you have power, both the acquisition of that power and the usage of that power is what dominated the workforce, right? Well, he's the boss, notably he, right? Often the white guy, he, right, is the boss. So that there, when you look at it, I mean, that's just a case then you say, okay, well, why did it change so dramatically? Because this group of people always had people showing up. Their identity was driving to work in a slightly better BMW, a slightly better Audi, a slightly better Mercedes, a slightly better Porsche. Now they're not there. Well, what do you do if your identity is walking out of your office, looking at a sea of cubes where your people are supposed to be, and it's empty? I mean, the emotional tumult that I think a lot of leaders faced from their identity having a gaping hole blown in it was a real problem that I don't think we really appreciated. Or maybe we did appreciate it and didn't care because it's like those guys have been in charge long enough, they can get over it. So I think just the social fabric was torn. I think irreparably torn myself. Now, okay, that's nice. It's a painting of what it is. Now, what about the people coming in? So my son's 24. He works at a Big Four firm, consulting firm. It's very good. He's been basically raised since he was 6. Whether it was like the at night and on the weekend McKinsey problem solving calls while we were driving to hockey and lacrosse and football. He's been problem solving since he was 6, right? He's probably better at it than I am now. In his mind, well, of course you want to be in the office. So when he summered, he went to the office every day, wanted to see partners. And so there's this weird mix, right, of people who are thirsty for coaching, thirsting for apprenticeship. But who are those people? Those people had high school and college devastated by COVID. All the social things that you would do. Think about all the normative things we learned in high school. Yeah. When you ask someone to go on a date, when you ask them to go out, how you behave in class, how you behave on a team, all those things were obliterated. So we already have a group that by and large was over-reliant on digital tools to communicate in the absence of social cues. So the normative effect of behavioral cues from other people has been lost on this generation. So in many respects, how do you behave as an employee, we almost have to finish cooking them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for them, they desperately need to come in, right? So, but what we do, we onboard them remotely. No way. You actually have to bring them back. Like if we don't find a way to start getting the hooks back into what does it mean to be us, starting with how do we behave here? Like how would you know where people go and what time they go to lunch? or what the norms are about people. You wouldn't, because you don't get any of it. So I just think this is one of those, we have the tech, which is dominant, gets a lot of attention, the old dudes who are in charge, and then this group in the middle who never left anyway. And now the youngsters coming in going, please help me attach, because I don't really want to be as free-flung as the Uber driver. Does that make sense?
It's really interesting because in I think in a lot of our conversations we talk about the power dynamic shifting to the employee, because now I have flexibility, I can work from anywhere. Now it opens up all kinds of worldwide opportunities for my work, and not just the employer in my city. But the opposite effect is where you're at, is the new hires, the new generation doesn't know how to socialize, doesn't know how to interact, doesn't know how to engage the same way that we did and how we learned in the office. So that's an interesting dynamic. I'm curious, if you throw now Gen AI into it, does it change the dynamic? Does it bring things back? Here's the thing, does it give the employer the upper hand because I can do things without employees? Or does it give the employees the upper hand because now I can do my job better with some help?
I think both. For sure. I mean, one of the last things I did at McKinsey just before I left was Brian and I, with Lorena Lee, looking at Gen AI in talent. To the extent, and as an aside, just because I have to, we used to have Monte Carlo, then we had machine learning, then we had neural networks, then we had AI. Generative AI is just the next in, soon's AGI, right? But this lump of a large language model that you're filling either with your own proprietary stuff or you're filling with open stuff, right? Just under that confluence. Well, what might you fill a large language model with? How about everything you know? But that's 40 years old. Yeah. Knowledge management systems, particularly for engineering firms and others, pretty well known, right? We used to have corporate librarians for a reason. I think the extent to which we're using Gen AI for knowing what we know and the rapid access and synthesis of what we know, we might actually have to bring some corporate librarians back, because the refresh rate, it's like, I'm not saying we're bringing back the Dewey Decimal System, but you need some way of cataloging this stuff. It's probably ontological. It's probably referenced across a couple tags. Meta tags might actually have their day now in terms of being used properly so people can get access to cool information. So for just-in-time training, just-in-time knowledge, and probably more curated onboarding, I believe in all of that making the employee better. The extent to which it's things like deck production by pulling existing slides, model production by reusing, like, remember when OLE was a thing, the object library was supposed to make people faster at building models. I think this just might end up being the object library as strings of code, not bits of code that you can get access to it. What is it not doing? I'm not sure it's going to be as good as the artisanal way of how efficient and how novel can I be in the way I structure the code, the way I structure the model. That, I think, maybe we're not quite there. So I think the answer is both. The extent to which you're doing stuff by rote, you should probably be looking for something else. However, your ability to get up to speed quickly and know what we know, also in the employee's favor. I do think, though, the underbelly of all of this is all of those things rely on people who are pretty darn good at problem solving, right? Pretty good at critical reasoning. And, even with a gentle eye, we're having a really hard time producing kids out of K through 12 who can do that.
And even that problem solving relies on things that I've already learned, things that I already know. There's something to be said about a Gen AI model, a large language model, or any kind of large database that avoids me having to relearn things, or the new generation having to learn something that was learned 20 years ago, right? So even that cleanup, you've got to make sure you're not throwing away the baby with the bathwater. It's a complicated problem of what's true. I like the concept. I know what I know. How do we make sure that it's still valid down the road, and what's valid and what's not? It's interesting.
This validation assumptions are really good, right? Is what was going to be. And, I think that, I'm about to say this to you. And as you can see, you're going to see my arms shrinking to where I look more like a T-Rex. Okay. We're going to be like this. So I studied under a woman named Lorraine Gardner for multivariate regression at Auburn. She ended up going to Arizona State. She was wonderful. She studied under a guy named John Nieder, who wrote all the textbooks for this. It's only because those people who know regression will instantly start getting a twitch when I say it. But we were forced to learn matrix algebra by hand before we were allowed to start using SPSS or SAS, right? I mean, I still have the syntax for my dissertation where I wrote it down and I wrote myself little notes about what it was. Now, does that suggest that everyone should have to learn matrix algebra by hand? I don't think so. Should they know what the hell is going on when they push a button? I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think, I think sometimes we have confused experience for expertise. So if you've had an experience of something, you replicate the experience and say, oh, well, this is how I did it. Whereas expertise is, why you did it that way. You know why what was happening. So you have a chance of hell of explaining it to others and engaging in challenging constraints, challenging assumptions. And I worry that the extent to which we become so reliant on digital or statistical tools, and I separate them out, we don't know why we're doing it. Right. And then I think we have a real challenge. I actually think we're at a deficit of thought. I mean, you could argue the two things we have going on right now is we've lost the ability to have civil discourse when we're disagreeing, and we have lost the ability to critically reason. And I think in both cases, we're at the worst for it.
Yeah, you're almost taking it on faith that when I push that button, I know what it's going to do. I know that it's going to give me the outcome I need. But I look back at my career, and some of the most valuable education that I still rely on is my technical education that I got 30, 40 years ago, because it gave me the underlying how to code, the logic, and even the creativity that goes into coding, right? That critical thinking and experimentation. You can't discount that. But then the other side, I'm curious on your thoughts about the changing requirements of those leaders, whether they're frontline or middle managers, as all of this, as our environment changes, both in where workers are, what they know, how they're coming into the workforce. Those leaders have to evolve as well. Are they remote or in the office? How do I manage that leader that walks out into the office amongst a sea of empty cubes? They have to manage that staff differently now. So what are your thoughts? Talk a bit about how those leaders need to change and what happens when they don't.
Well, then they need to be changed.
Right.
I mean, there is probably, whether you were looking at the old Gallup work or the Zender work or the McKinsey work, and others have done it over time, but the consensus, all right, the synthesis of this is, at any given time, a third of people in leadership roles are not up to it and never will be. A third probably need help, and a third are probably okay, but probably underdeveloped. Maybe they're more preternatural, but they could be better. In so many cases, the hierarchical nature of how companies are set up, largely by the Hay Point system and the old school militaristic view of the table of the organization. Okay, so what do? You collect stuff. You do land grabs. It's like you bring in customers, accounts people. That's how you justify getting a higher title.
Kingdom building.
Exactly. But the assumption that all that stuff from yesterday is going to translate going forward, it's amazing how we have all these, stories and decks around now more than ever, right? And they're like, oh, tomorrow's going to be different. But the same old white dudes are going to be in charge. Trust us, we're okay. It's as if we wanted to be inoculated from the change that was being foisted on everyone else. It makes no sense. So I would say that it's right to be suspicious that the people who were in charge yesterday should be in charge tomorrow. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be. It just means, can you take what you've experienced, distill it down into basic assumptions and worldviews, models, ways of thinking, and saying, does that still hold? And then most importantly, underneath that, do they still have enough curiosity to continue learning? I mean, if I were to say one thing that I think has benefited me from my McKinsey experience was because I had functional expertise, I never needed to learn about organization stuff. I was always going to be Dr. Schaninger, right, on that. But I got to learn about refineries, chemical plants, fossil power plants, nuclear power plants, above ground mining, below ground mining, shipbuilding, airplane building, banks, insurance companies, whatever, like video game makers. Underlying all that was a curiosity of, as soon as I was introduced into it, I was like, oh my God, how does this work? Where does risk come from? What's the economic model here, right? And so when you talk about the modern leader, I got to tell you, I think one of them is stop looking to repeat yesterday. Take what you can from it and dump the rest, and just remain curious, right, about tomorrow, both in terms of the problem, where the value comes from and the risk. I would say, by and large, the leaders who want to continue to think of this as a power dynamic between just employer and the employee is missing the point.
Right.
ESG, by any other name, is here, whether we like it or not. Multi-stakeholder is here, right? You are going to be crushed. Now, of course, we are seeing a lot of companies remaining private or going private because they don't want to deal with a lot of this stuff. But even that's on borrowed time, because the workforce is voting with their feet about where you are. So I'd say curiosity, really grounding in assumed constraints, and assumptions, risk around value. For sure, embracing the idea that multi-stakeholder is here. You cannot just solve for the company anymore. I mean, that might makes right stuff that we were doing for the longest. Well, I'm doing it for shareholders. Actually, you're just being a scumbag. You know, just because you can charge 3,500% more for a drug that someone needs doesn't mean you should. It makes you a scumbag, right?
Yep.
I mean, this idea of pricing power, what you make, whom you sell it to. If the regulatory environment is the only bar you hit, you are almost certainly going to be on the wrong side of history.
Right.
For sure. And I think the last part is, they used to label it servant leadership. I often thought that label didn't help. But this idea is it's much more about them than it is you. There's something to that, right? In terms of like your job as a leader cannot possibly be about the maintenance and protection of you. And it has to be about the propagation of them.
Yep.
And I think if you don't buy into that, you're probably not going to be a very good leader.
How about Bill, specifically in IT? We got a lot of, as a technology show, we got a lot of IT leaders and managers. Anything specific that an IT leader should take away right now? What would you encourage them to embrace and changes to consider specific to leading technology teams?
Well, like most, so if you think about HR, finance, and IT kind of grouped together in terms of getting the people and the tools I need to do the job. And then regulatory risk compliance kind of like keep us away from the third rails. Let's say you bucket those two support functions, you groups them different. I think for IT, much like HR, has often struggled with folks who wanted to play at business but didn't get the business. They got the hardware, they got the software, they got the GDPR was a boom to them, safe harbor before, right? Because they could play the holier than thou pseudo lawyer almost card.
Right.
I think the people who are best at IT embrace the idea of why does this classic performance context, why does this thing exist? What's our strategy? Is that different going forward? What's the culture we'd like around here and that we have to play into? How are the boxes actually drawn? How do the boxes work together? A good IT leader is an officer first and IT leader second, right? They really have to be interchangeable as an officer first. Now, they may have the most amazing domain expertise and the most amazing technical expertise, but the ability for you to be a good colleague first. And I'm not saying, by the way, you'll never hear me say, oh, serve your colleagues. I also think that's a mistake. This idea of internal customers, that puts the power dynamic in the hand of the generalist or the salespeople. Why? You're all paid by the same company. There's only one group of people writing you a check. It's outside you. Right. So I think here, I just think the power dynamic has forced many, particularly of HR and IT, into the dynamic where it's like, oh, well, there are internal customers. No, they're not. They're your colleagues, right? You're there to each bring your own gifts and your own passions to bear collaboratively. So sometimes power dynamics start inside first before they even get to who you're serving. IT folks, I think they should lead with business knowledge, fast follow with technical knowledge. That would be my encouragement. And I think the ones that get that are pretty good, right? And they get it. And I also think they make better leaders. The extent to which that you're growing people around technical expertise, but will often overlook behavior, also a mistake, right?
Right.
You'll see people you like, the radar is just not on for what the world is giving them, right? It's like, just tune in a little bit, Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's all good stuff.
So, Bill, if you were going to, we've spoken a lot about advice, primarily, I guess, for leaders in this climate. If we were going to focus momentarily on the employees themselves, we've spoken about the influence and potential impact of AI a bit already. What advice, considering we are entering the era of AI, I would say technologically, what advice do you give to the employees, young or middle-aged or whatnot, relatively early in their career for making a success, for being successful in this technological era?
It's a great question. I really thought you were going to go with the Barbara Walters version of if you could be a tree, what kind of tree would you be? But there we go. Look, I think for workers of this era, I think three things. One, know what matters to you and be unwavering on it. So classic purpose, what really matters to you. Two, I think it's incredibly important to recognize your own agency and that you always have choice, even if choice leads you to something that may feel a little scary. But three, remember, you do have an obligation as a member of something bigger than you to contribute back to that. It is not one way. So I'd say what matters, where your agency lies, and then your obligation. And I think if you can manage all three of those, you likely are able to thrive.
Wonderful. Bill, I said at the top of the discussion, I said there are two things I like most about your analysis, and we touched upon one of them, which was, of course, the expansiveness of it. The other one is your I wouldn't say contempt, but your cynicism at times towards business jargon. I
Yeah.
enjoy it. And ironically, you've already kind of taken apart indirectly one of my least favorite bits of contemporary business jargon, which they call the democratization of work, which is like a really cuddly way of saying no one's going to have a proper job anymore, and you're going to have to just wing it from task to task. So we've already done this one, but I was wondering if there are any other, just to finish things off, management or leadership buzz phrases you're most skeptical of presently, and why?
So many in so little time.
Nice.
So the things I hear now that I love to like poke on. So people will say, agile. Well, which part about agile? Agility as a phrase means there's a stable backbone and there's then a speed of application, deploy and redeploy. Okay, is that what you mean? I don't think you mean turn the company on its side, use a language that no one knows what the hell you're talking about in chapters, guilds, tribes, right? Why does a way of working have to come with a new language? I'll tell you why it has to have a new language, because then nobody understands it. When nobody understands it, then it's religion. That's power. Because there's the in group and there's the outer group. Most of these acronyms are power plays, right? Around saying, oh, you don't know that? Oh, give me a break.
Right.
OKRs versus KPIs. Here's something. How about you have a goal? You have a goal that for the company that turns down to a goal for the person. The goal for the person is measured a certain way. We call it a metric. You got to agree on a target on what's good and what's not good. How about plain language? Right? Not this nonsense.
Plain language. Let's bring it back.
Yeah, you know what we used to joke. I have one on my leaving party. I have things. One of them is called "Beat It with the Simple Stick." Nice. My unwavering desire is to just mock people when I feel like if you know something well enough, you can distill it down to your mom or your fifth grader can understand what you're saying. If you don't, you are doomed to repeat acronyms and buzzwords that you don't actually understand.
We used to turn it into a contest. We'd pick out the silliest acronym or buzzword that we could and see whoever could work it into a conference call the most times in a meaningless way got the most points.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I don't get it. I really don't. I mean, it's kind of like, I think it's a form of affinity and belonging, like in group and out group, we're in because I get it. But the actual impact of that, like I do this thing with leaders. I say, hey, just for giggles, a simple word like accountability. What does it mean to you? But you can't use the word accountability. First, at least half the room will reuse the word accountability. Mm-hmm. Some of them will be like obligation, goals, targets, consequences, reward, or whatever. I mean, you get a full range. I go, well, okay, this is the issue with what we're talking about. A simple word means incredibly different things.
Yep.
So if we said, hey, we're going to go work on accountability, and we never bothered to say what you're going to do, they'd be working at cross purposes immediately. So much of this is, why wouldn't we just say, okay, great, we're going to work accountability. Let's just take a moment to say what we're going to do and make sure that works for all of us. The willingness to sit and pause just clutch for a second and just agree on the action that we're going to take and the assumptions we're making, we'd be a whole lot better off.
A lot of times it gets simplified to its most basic form too. Accountability is, who do I need to blame when it goes wrong? Whose fault is it? Yeah. And accountability is not about fault.
Right? Think about that. Oh, who's the one throat to choke?
Right. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
I'm going to have nightmares tonight, Bill. My corporate days.
Well, speaking of acronyms, thank you, Bill, for coming on the DEX show. It's been an absolute pleasure, and really lived up to our expectations of this conversation. Before you go, do tell our listeners anywhere you want them to go to find you, your books, etc. Any plugs you want to give them here, sir.
Well, thank you for the plug. So there's a website, billschaninger.com. Schaninger is SCHANINGER. That's the website I built when I thought I was retiring, but it's kept up to date. I'm super active on LinkedIn, right? And then you can go to the firm's website, Modern Executive Solutions. But certainly, for sure, between LinkedIn or others, we can connect, right? And I do actually respond. The last book out was from this out just under a year, which is Power to the Middle, about the importance of the middle manager. There's an audiobook to that, by the way, where I'm the narrator. And so that was one of the deals we did with HBR, was that I wanted the ability to narrate the book because I so hated the voice of the narrator on Beyond Performance. So, and now that you've listened to me through the podcast, you will never have a sleeping problem. I assure you. Just
not at all. Not at all. Thank you so much, Bill. Been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, guys. This is great. Really appreciate it.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.